ABC.
The Secret Service foils a second attempt on Donald Trump's life, the suspected assassin in custody in Florida. Housing hold-up, a political stoush unfolding over the government's planned housing policies. Not guilty, a married couple acquitted over the murder of teenager in New South Wales more than 2 decades ago. And Australian actress Elizabeth Debicki bags her first Emmy Award for her portrayal of Princess Diana in The Crown. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Joe O'Brien. We've also got an emergency fire warning that's just popped up in WA in the Carnarvon area. We'll have more on that in a moment. There's been yet another dramatic incident in this 2024 US presidential campaign. A man has been arrested in Florida after a suspected assassination attempt on Donald Trump. A Secret Service agent opened fire after spotting a man with a firearm hiding in shrubs about 400 metres away from the former president, who was playing golf on his course in West Palm Beach. The man fled by car but was apprehended nearby. US media outlets, including CNN, Fox News and the New York Times, have identified the suspect as a 58-year-old Ryan Wesley Ruth of Hawaii, citing unidentified law enforcement officials. The FBI has declined to comment and the ABC has not independently verified his identity. The ABC has found profiles on X and LinkedIn for a Ryan Ruth, who appears to be the man identified as the suspect by those news organisations. Donald Trump is unharmed and says his resolve is even stronger after having survived an assassination attempt in Pennsylvania in July. North America correspondent Barbara Miller has more from West Palm Beach, Florida.
When you see the trees and the shrubbery lining this golf course at West Palm Beach, Florida, it's easy to imagine how someone might have been able to hide themselves. And that's what authorities say happened. They say that as Donald Trump was making his way around his golf course, a Secret Service agent went ahead of him. And that agent, they say, spotted the barrel of a rifle poking through and started to take aim in that direction. Not clear whether the person holding that weapon fired back. The man then fled the scene, and authorities say that a witness was able to take a photo of the license plate of the car, a black Nissan that he fled in, and that allowed them to track that car, and an arrest was then made in a neighbouring county. Now, US media is naming this suspect, now in custody, as 58-year-old Ryan Wesley Routh. He was originally from North Carolina, and from what we know so far, he appears to be someone who was not afraid to express his political opinion. He had strong opinions, for example, about the war in Ukraine, appears to have tried to sign up as a foreign fighter himself, was then rejected, and then tried to encourage other people to sign up to fight for Ukraine. Authorities now considering what charges they bring against this suspect. Donald Trump was kept here at the golf course for a while. He was then allowed to return the several miles back to Mar-a-Lago, his residence here in Florida. He has put out a post saying it was certainly an interesting day. He early on assured people that he was safe and no one had been injured. He says that the Secret Service and other authorities did an outstanding job. Donald Trump has events scheduled this week, including a town hall in Michigan in a couple of days' time. And pushing ahead would fit with the fighting stance his supporters have come to expect from him. But it's hard to see how events here would not have some impact on campaigning over the next 50 days until the election. As for the polls, well, they've shown very little movement through a previous assassination attempt, a change of candidate, and 2 noteworthy debates. All the signs are that despite its remarkable twists and turns, 2024 remains a very close race. Barbara Miller, ABC News, West Palm Beach, Florida.
A bushfire is threatening lives and homes in parts of Carnarvon, about 900 kilometres north of Perth in WA. So this has only just popped up recently. An emergency warning in place for people bounded by Bibbawarra Road, North River Road, Cecilia Street and the Gascoyne River in North Plantations and Ingada. So this is over the river from the main part of Carnarvon. The fire is moving in a westerly direction and is not controlled or contained, and the Bureau of Meteorology website at the moment says it's about 31 degrees. It's been, relatively hot over in WA for this time of year for a couple of weeks now. And there's an easterly blowing. It's not too strong, gusting up to 28 k's an hour, but a very dangerous situation there for people in that area just to the north of the Carnarvon township. If you want the very latest detailed information, you can listen in to ABC Local Radio and also go to the Department of Fire and Emergency Services website. The federal government is staring down a political challenge on a key housing bill, calling on the Greens and Coalition to back its shared equity scheme in Parliament this week. Separately, it's rolling out some of the money on one of its big policies from the last election to increase housing supply. So more than 13,700 social and affordable homes have now been approved. Of those, 4,220 will be social housing, where rent is set at a level affordable to those on low incomes. Another 9,500 will be affordable homes, capped at 3/4 of market rent. Overall, the government expects 40% of successful applicants to start construction this financial year. Under the plan, 40,000 new social and affordable homes will be built over 5 years. Housing Minister Claire O'Neil says the first round of homes will go to those most in need.
That thousands of Australian frontline workers, women and children fleeing domestic violence, older women who are at risk of homelessness will have safe and secure and affordable housing.
Meanwhile, the government is preparing for another housing showdown in the Senate over its Help to Buy scheme, which is being blocked by the opposition and the Greens. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says it's the solution to building more affordable housing in the country.
Simple scheme of shared equity to enable people to get into housing earlier than they would otherwise. This is about supporting home ownership in this country, and it's something that should frankly have sailed through.
However, Community Housing Industry Association CEO Wendy Hayhurst believes there's a range of ways to improve accessibility to home ownership for lower income households.
These bills on their own are not going to solve the housing crisis, but if they got right, if we can get the amendments, particularly in the Build to Rent bill, then it could be adding to supply and providing more affordable housing as well. We reckon that if we get our amendments through on the Build to Rent, we could have 1,200 affordable housing tenancies over the next year to add to those that the government's funding through the Housing Australia Future Fund.
A married couple from regional New South Wales has been found not guilty of murdering teenager Amber Haig, who disappeared more than 2 decades ago. The 19-year-old was living on and off with Robert and Anne Jeeves at their home before she went missing in June of 2002. Reporter Monty Jacker has more from Sydney.
An enduring mystery of the New South Wales Riverina will remain unsolved after Robert and Anne Jeeves were found not guilty of murdering Amber Haig. Ms Haig was a 19-year-old with an intellectual disability who vanished in June 2002 while living near Young in the New South Wales Riverina. Her disappearance occurred while she was involved in a strange situation, living with the much older Robert Jeeves, who she had a 5-month-old baby with, and his wife Anne Jeeves. After more than 2 decades, the married couple were arrested in 2022 and charged with murdering the teenager. The prosecution alleged they'd used Amber as a surrogate mother to have another child before killing her to remove her from the equation. The defence said the case was deeply flawed and argued there was no evidence which proved the couple had killed Amber. Today, after a judge-alone trial spanning more than 9 weeks, Justice Julia Lonergan found the couple not guilty. She stressed that cases are not decided on rumours, speculation, innuendo or suspicion, and concluded that she believed the version of events put forward by the Jeeves may be true. She found that Amber Haig had died at some point in June 2002 and lamented the loss of a vulnerable young woman. She said Amber went back and forth between places and people looking for love and solace. She never found it. She was still looking for it when she disappeared. The courtroom was packed with members of the public, reporters and members of both the Jeeves and Amber's family. There was silence in the courtroom as the verdict was read out. One woman wiped tears from her face. A young man then stormed out of the room and let out a yell of frustration in the hallway. The Jeeves will now presumably return to their home in Harden, while those who loved Amber will continue their long wait for closure.
Monty Jacko reporting there from Sydney. Former Victorian Liberal MP Moira Deeming's defamation case against opposition leader John Pizzuto has begun. She's accused her former boss of tarring her with the Nazi brush. It follows Ms Deeming's attendance at a rally against transgender rights last year, which was gate-crashed by neo-Nazis. Victorian political reporter Elias Kluwer has more.
Former Liberal MP Moira Deeming is suing her former boss, opposition leader John Pizzuto, after she was expelled from the Victorian branch of the Liberal Party back in May 2023. It all started in March 2023 when Moira Deeming attended an event where controversial women's rights activist Kelly J. Keane gave a speech on the steps of Parliament. That event was gate-crashed by neo-Nazis and white supremacists. Now, in the ensuing hours and days of that particular event, John Pizzuto moved to remove Miss Deeming from the Victorian branch of the Liberal Party. He was ultimately successful in May of 2023. In court today, Miss Deeming's barrister, Sukasanthu SC, said that her former boss, Mr Pizzuto, had led a campaign of destruction against Moira Deeming and had destroyed her reputation as an otherwise respectable and up-and-coming parliamentarian. She also said that he tarred her with the Nazi brush. She said that if Mr Pizzuto had done any research, he would have found that the organiser of the event had no associations with neo-Nazis or white supremacists, and that Moira Deeming had continually condemned the behaviour of the neo-Nazis there and was horrified when she saw a Nazi salute being performed. The trial continues. Ms Sukasanthu SC says we'll also hear from Liberal leaders who had a meeting around how they should handle this particular saga.
Elias Kluwer reporting there from Melbourne. Queensland's Truth-Telling and Healing Inquiry has officially begun, marking the first steps of a 3-year process to understand how colonisation has impacted Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's part of the state government's Path to Treaty Act, which passed Parliament with bipartisan support last year. Here's reporter Liz Gwynn in Brisbane.
This has been described as a historic moment for Queensland. Around 2,000 people attended the start of the inquiry, which was a ceremonial hearing in Brisbane this morning. Now, this inquiry will run for 3 years and it aims to look at the impacts and ongoing effects of colonisation on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but it also is hoping to create and build a better understanding in the wider community of Australia's history. The Truth-Telling and Healing Inquiry is part of the state government's Path to Treaty Act, which passed Parliament with bipartisan support last year. It will be independent of the Queensland Government and First Nations led. Today, the ceremonial hearing started with a welcome to country, prayer and traditional song and dance before members of the inquiry outlined its objective and how it will advise and make recommendations. Chair of the inquiry and Kalkadoon man Joshua Creamer said that it's important to establish a public record of the past and the ongoing systemic impacts.
This is a product of generations of work, of advocacy, of experience, of striving to actually have our stories told. A big focus on ensuring all Queenslanders understand our shared history, a focus on reconciliation and a focus on healing. And those are really strong foundations which the inquiry will continue to achieve over the next 3 years.
The inquiry is meant to run for 3 years and it will travel all over the state so that anyone who wants to make a written submission or engage in the process in person is able to do that. However, with an election looming, the future of the inquiry is actually unclear because opposition leader David Crisafulli withdrew his support after last year's Voice referendum was defeated. When asked about this today, Mr Crisafulli confirmed the LNP still intends to repeal treaty laws.
Focus is on real outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I'm determined to set ministers targets and hold them accountable, and I'll let the Labor Party talk about their priorities. Mine is on giving opportunity for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
So you still intend to repeal the treaty?
Yes, yes.
Brisbane starts Queensland's truth-telling process. After that, the hearings will be held in communities right across the state over the next 3 years.
Queenslanders have welcomed the news that 50-cent public transport fares will remain no matter which party claims victory in next month's state election. Here's reporter Ariana Levy in Brisbane.
Well, this has certainly been quite an interesting policy announcement from both parties. The Miles government and the state's opposition, the LNP, have both announced that they will continue 50-cent public transport fees well past the state election next month. Now, this originally started as a 6-month trial. It was announced by Premier Stephen Miles back in August, and within the 5 weeks, they say that they've managed to save commuters up to $37 million by cutting these fares in half. It's something that applied not just to trains, but also trams, ferries and buses, all connected to the TransLink network. And they say that this addressed one of the key issues for voters, which is cost of living. We've also heard that there are concerns in the regions that the network is not quite up to scratch. The Premier has described this as sort of a bit of a chicken and egg situation where effectively services are not quite available, so not a lot of people do use public transport in the regions. But for the Premier and for the state government to be able to deliver more, they say that they need to have that increased patronage, despite the fact that through this 50-cent period in the last 5 weeks, there has been an increase from Bundaberg all the way through to Cairns of about 8% in patronage use. But this is something that the LNP has basically said that they've come to the table with a plan. They're hoping to address this issue if they are elected into government, and they will be looking to also expand the regional network. Now, the Premier was also heavily grilled on News Breakfast this morning about the cost of this policy to taxpayers. He defended the decision and says that it will effectively help address cost of living and relief for many people across the state.
We do have those progressive coal royalties, which are delivering the additional revenue to fund our cost of living measures. If you got rid of those royalties, like the LNP have said they will do, then that will have an impact on your ability to keep doing things like this. You'll need to cut, you would need to cut something. But the actual revenue impact of 50-cent fares is pretty small.
Well, with the state election just around the corner, key issues like cost of living and youth crime are certainly shaping up to be front and centre of voters' minds, and almost very similar to what we saw in the Northern Territory election. So the main question is going to be whether or not these policies are enough in terms of cost of living relief for constituents as we get closer to October 26.
Ariana Levy reporting there. Each year, about 200 babies are born in Canberra through IVF. But patients and doctors say new assisted reproductive technology laws are making it near impossible to conceive with donated sperm in the ACT. A donor registry was introduced to protect the well-being of donor-conceived people, but is now pushing women to travel interstate to fall pregnant. Lily Nothling has this Stateline report.
Alex and Anna have been building a life together for 6 years. Having kids has always been part of the plan.
We imagined that perhaps 12 months from now, ideally one of us would be pregnant.
But that future looks less likely now the couple has moved to Canberra, where the government recently introduced tighter laws around assisted reproductive technology.
When you want to start a family, you hope it's going to be an exciting adventure. And for us, it's become a logistical, financial, distressing situation.
The centrepiece of the new legislation is a mandatory donor register, making it easier for people conceived from donated sperm, eggs or embryos to find out about their genetic heritage. It'll include information such as a donor's full name, address, physical characteristics and other offspring. Eventually, historic donors will retrospectively be added to the register, regardless of whether they donated under the promise of anonymity. The laws also include a cap on the number of families that can be created from a single donor. The laws were brought in to protect the well-being of donor-conceived people. As a small jurisdiction, Canberra is heavily reliant on overseas sperm banks, which are reluctant to comply with the new requirements.
We're hearing very worrying stories that they may not be prepared to supply any more sperm to the ACT, which would be a massive problem for women and couples.
Professor Stephen Robson is the president of the Australian Medical Association and a practising IVF clinician in Canberra.
I've had a number of my own patients in tears, feeling that they're being forced to move forward with treatment at a time that they're not prepared.
The changes were due to take effect at the end of the month, meaning frozen gametes would have to comply or be unusable. But that timeline's being reconsidered.
I've asked the Health Directorate to provide urgent advice to the incoming government about extending that transition period.
As they navigate the legislation, Alex and Anna have tried 2 different Canberra IVF providers. Both have told them their international sperm banks will no longer service the ACT. The women say queer couples will be disproportionately affected.
It looks like we're going to have to travel to Victoria or New South Wales to make our dream of becoming parents a reality, because we just can't access any overseas donation in the ACT now.
The ACT government has defended the changes, but says it's monitoring the fallout.
If ART providers are seeing an impact of this legislation on the availability of gametes, then we do want to hear about that. But I think it's important to emphasise that the ACT legislation is largely mirroring what happens in other jurisdictions.
This legislation makes it very difficult, near impossible for couples like Anna and I to build the families that they want to build. And so, that really raises the question, is it an LGBTQ inclusive territory?
Lily Nothling, ABC News, Canberra.
The death toll is rising in Central Europe after days of heavy rain caused widespread flooding and mass evacuations. A low-pressure system triggered downpours across several countries. 6 people have died in Romania and 1 each in Austria and Poland. Some of the worst rainfall has been in the Czech Republic, where 4 people are missing. Up to 10,000 people were evacuated from areas flooded by the raging Opava River. The Czech town of Jesenik has been completely cut off, with roads and rail lines underwater. At least 8 people have drowned while trying to cross the English Channel from northern France. An inflatable boat carrying around 60 people broke apart on rocks north of Boulogne shortly after setting off. 6 people were taken to hospital, including a 10-month-old baby with hypothermia. The survivors came from Eritrea, Sudan, Syria, Afghanistan, Egypt and Iran. It's thought more than 800 migrants arrived in Dover yesterday alone. And so far this year, 45 people have died trying to cross to the UK. China and Russia have completed the first stage of their joint military drills. China says the drills aim to deepen strategic cooperation with Russia and strengthen both countries' ability to respond to security threats. The exercises included simulated missile attacks. They involved 90,000 military personnel and over 500 army vehicles, including submarines and aircraft. On this day, 49 years ago, the Australian flag was lowered in Papua New Guinea's capital to mark the end of 70 years of colonial rule. To mark the young nation's Independence Day, tens of thousands have turned out across the country as PNG celebrates progress and the challenges ahead. ABC correspondent Marion Farr reports from Port Moresby.
The celebrations started early with fireworks over the capital. And as dawn broke this morning, whistles and cheers greeted the raising of PNG's flag on Independence Hill. A country of hundreds of tribes united.
It was not too long ago when our fathers and mothers decided to forge the most diverse nation on the face of planet Earth into one unity.
On this day in 1975, the Australian flag was lowered for the final time. It marked the end of almost a century of colonial rule under Germany, Britain and then Australia.
Gough Whitlam said it was his proudest achievement in office to have birthed Papua New Guinean independence, and I think that's a wonderful legacy.
People here couldn't agree more.
Today we are celebrating independence today. We're so very happy here and so excited here.
I feel proud of my country, Papua New Guinea, because that's the time where people come together, celebrate in culture.
What you're seeing here is just a taste of what's to come, with Papua New Guinea already gearing up for its 50th anniversary of independence next year. It'll be a time to reflect on how far the country has come and the ongoing challenges it faces, such as unemployment, poverty and women's rights.
This generation, under my words, pledge that we will not let the dream go to waste, but we will do our absolute best to ensure we pass on a better PNG to our children.
Determination and hope for a young nation looking towards the future. Marion Farr, ABC News, Port Moresby.
The Emmy Awards have wrapped up in Los Angeles, with Australian Elizabeth Debicki picking up her first Emmy. Shogun shattered the record books, grabbing 18 awards out of its 25 nominations, including 4 primetime gongs. Here's reporter Sarah Gerrathy, starting with Elizabeth Debicki's victory.
She's really been the standout of this season of The Crown. The Crown was, lauded with so many awards in previous years. Its first few seasons were really a darling of the awards circuit. But this season was really panned by comparison, except for Elizabeth Debicki's portrayal, of course, of Princess Diana. Now, as well as having a bit of an uncanny physical resemblance to Princess Diana, she also really captured that sort of doe-eyed vulnerability, but also the strength of the people's princess. And she was rewarded with the Best Supporting Actress in a Drama Emmy in LA today. In winning the award, she described playing Diana as playing an unparalleled, incredible human being, and said that it was a gift and the honour of her life.
So, what's all this buzz about Shogun now?
Well, we're all rushing to watch it now. If you haven't already been on the Shogun bandwagon, I'm going to get on it. Joe, it sounds like you too. Definitely. Basically, this is a show, it's a historic Japanese epic. It's subtitled. It's really not your typical, fodder that Hollywood might go for. It sounds very expensive to make. And it won 18 awards at the Emmys this year, which smashes the previous record, which was 15 awards, I think. And its 2 lead actors, Hiroyuki Sanada and Anna Sawai, also became the first Japanese actors to win Emmys, so historic in that way as well. And it also won the award for Best Drama, which is, of course, one of the biggest awards of the night. And the showrunner pointed out in his victory speech that he was really shocked, basically, to have this very expensive subtitled Japanese period piece whose central climax revolved around a poetry competition, apparently, Joe. So he said he doesn't know how it was greenlit in the first place, but obviously it shows that there is an appetite for things that are unusual, things that are groundbreaking, and people obviously lapped this up.
I'm intrigued. And a few surprises?
Yeah, look, the dark drama Baby Reindeer, I don't know if you've seen that one, but it's pretty disturbing. Did better than it was expected. It won acting awards for both of its stars.
I'm not surprised that it won, because it was so good.
It was, but it also won the Best Limited or Anthology Series, as well as a Writing Award. So it really did probably even better than was expected. Yeah. But obviously those 2 star performances were, always garnering a bit of attention during the awards season.
And the kilt was a winner?
Yes, that's right. And the star and creator Richard Gadd spoke about essentially how he'd turned these really disturbing events that had happened in his life into this, creation. And he said that, it proved that you don't necessarily need to have big stars to make a good TV series. All you need is really good storytelling.
10 years.
Reporter Sarah Gerrathy there. The American musician Tito Jackson has died. He was 70. He was an original member of the Jackson 5, along with brothers Jackie, Jermaine, Marlon and Michael, who died in 2009. He's survived by his 3 sons, Taj, Tarrell and TJ, who are in the band 3T, and 9 grandchildren. An official cause of death has not been determined. Time now for a look at the weather. Here's Isabella Tolhurst.
There are gusty winds across the north today, and we're seeing increased cloud coverage over Queensland and the Northern Territory. It's expected to rain in the Territory tomorrow, something very rare for this time of year, as the dry season's only just coming to an end. And in the south, skies are clearer, but another front is approaching Tasmania and Victoria, and it's bringing chilly conditions and rain later in the week. Around the country tomorrow, Brisbane's mostly sunny, a top of 24 degrees. Mostly blue skies in Sydney, 22 there. Canberra with morning frost before for a mostly sunny day, 19. Melbourne's partly cloudy, 17. A cloudy day for Hobart, 14 degrees the high. Adelaide mostly sunny, 19. Perth, 27 degrees, and showers in Darwin, 31.
This is ABC News. Our top stories: a man is in custody in Florida, accused of attempting to shoot Donald Trump on a golf course. Secret Service agents opened fire after spotting a rifle poking out of bushes near Mr. Trump on the West Palm Beach course. A man was later arrested nearby. US media has identified him as 58-year-old Ryan Wesley Ruth from Hawaii. The federal government cannot rely on the support of the Greens for its proposed Help to Buy scheme until Labor negotiates with their housing demands. The scheme would see the government purchase up to 40% of a property with the home buyer, reducing the size of the deposit of the mortgage. Some of the demands from the Greens in return for their support, including freezing caps on rent increases and phasing out negative gearing. New South Wales couple Robert and Anne Jeeves have been acquitted of the murder of missing mother Amber Haig in 2002. Prosecutors had alleged the couple killed the 19-year-old as part of a plot to gain custody of her young son, fathered by Mr. Jeeves. The defence argued there was no evidence the couple killed the young mother or knew what happened after she disappeared. And Australian actress Elizabeth Debicki has won an Emmy for her portrayal of Princess Diana in a TV series The Crown. Naomi Watts missed out on an Emmy for Best Lead Actress in a limited series, the award going to Jodie Foster for her performance in True Detective. Shogun, The Bear and Baby Reindeer have all picked up multiple awards. And returning now to that warning about a bushfire that's threatening lives and homes in parts of Carnarvon in the Gascoyne region of WA, 900 k's north of Perth. So an emergency warning is in place for people bounded by Bibbulwarra Road, North River Road, Cecilia Street and the Gascoyne River in North Plantations and Ingada. So this is an area just to the north of the town, across town from the river. People within that zone are being told they are in danger and need to act immediately to survive. Homes on North River Road are under direct threat by the fire. It's moving in a westerly direction and is not contained or controlled. You can get more information on your local ABC radio and also at Department of Foreign Emergency Services in WA. And so that's the really good source of information in those emergencies is ABC Local Radio. I just had a look at the Bureau of Meteorology website a short time ago. It was about 32 degrees in Carnarvon and easterly blowing up around 30 k's an hour. So that emergency warning is still in place there. So yeah, dangerous situation, so stay across it if you're in that Carnarvon area. More now on the suspected assassination attempt on Donald Trump. The alleged gunman who was taken into custody is Ryan Wesley Ruth. Retired FBI Special Agent Kenneth Gray says the strategies employed by the security detail to keep Mr. Trump safe will be examined.
Tactically speaking, the U.S. Secret Service did a great job in this case. As the president was playing golf, he had agents going ahead of him the next hole, looking to make sure that there was no threat there. The agent that went ahead to the next hole saw this barrel sticking through the fence and engaged the shooter at that time. The shooter fled from the area. He was identified through his tag. That car was tracked down and he was stopped and arrested. And so great job in stopping this. But one does have to wonder why it is that he was able to get this close. The president was one hole away, so 400, 500 yards away. That is close enough that had the shooter wanted to take a shot then, he could have struck the president at that distance. But instead, he was waiting for the president to get closer. And so tactically, good move on their part. Strategically, as far as letting this happen the way it did, I have some questions about that. But again, the former president does not have the resources afforded to him that the sitting president does.
The federal government has approved contracts for almost 14,000 social and affordable homes. The result puts the government ahead of its target to fund 40,000 homes in 5 years. Labor is also set to list its Help to Buy housing scheme in the Senate this week, though it's widely expected not to pass. Brendan Coates is the Grattan Institute's Housing and Economic Security Program Director and says it'll take some time for the homes in the Housing Australia Future Fund to be built.
The legislation was passed just on a year ago today. Applications first opened in January. They closed in March for the first round of bids for the money from the Housing Australia Future Fund. And now we've seen the announcement today that there's 14,000 homes that are now going to progress to the point of negotiating contracts and actually breaking ground on those properties. The challenge here is it just takes quite a long time to actually get new housing built, and even in the case where it is social housing, which is providing a deep support for those that are at vulnerable and risk of homelessness, it just takes time to get those proposals up and running and homes out of the ground.
And so when does it look like the first will be available to move into?
So the press release from the government today suggests something like 700 homes will be done this year. That's partly because the HAF could be used to fund homes that, say, existing builds that could be converted into social housing that would be available as low-income rentals for vulnerable tenants. So there's a small number this year, but it's from what we know, it sounds like about 40% of that 14,000 will start commencement this year. Really now it's up to how quickly the government can proceed with the second round of funding and the number of homes that it can extract from that process. Because if they can get the bulk of those homes essentially agreed and funded essentially within the first year and a half after the HAF legislation is passed, then we can be in a position we can be confident that most, if not all of them, will be built within that 5-year window.
So what kind of impact will this eventually have?
So the Housing Australia Future Fund, the social housing and affordable housing, it's not about hitting the 1.2 million housing target that the government has aimed for over a 5-year period. It's really about providing discounted homes to those that are vulnerable and otherwise at severe risk of homelessness. So it means that people who would otherwise end up on the streets or, in precarious housing situations will have a roof over their head, will be able to afford housing. Obviously, it is limited to those 40,000 homes that will be built. And hopefully in time, the capital of the HAF, which is currently $10 billion, will be expanded, and then we could see an ongoing flow of new social housing to sort of fill the backlog that we've seen in social housing in recent decades.
So how do you rate this as a policy to address a really serious issue in Australia?
I actually think it's a really good policy. It's not as big as what Grattan Institute recommended when we first put forward the proposal. We recommended a $20 billion fund. The government has opted for a $10 billion fund. So what we would like to see is for the capital to be doubled, if not tripled. And that would allow the government, instead of to be supporting 40,000 homes over the next 5 years, they'd be potentially able to support up to 100,000. And that would both help fill that social housing backlog that we're concerned about, and also actually contribute meaningfully to the government's target of 1.2 million homes over the next 5 years.
Yeah, because the demand is virtually overwhelming.
That's right. So it's the amount of social housing that society needs is ultimately a values question. There is no single right answer, but I think as a minimum what we want is a flow of new social housing for those that find themselves on hard times, given that most tenants do tend to stay for a long time. And at the moment, social housing is not keeping up with growth in the overall housing stock or with population. And so that need is rising and the stock's not there. So if we can at least start to see social housing growing at least as fast as population, ideally a bit faster to make up for past shortfalls, then we'll start to provide that support that those who are most vulnerable desperately need.
Okay, so on another front with housing, the government has proposed a shared equity model to get more people into housing, with the government helping you buy the house and then you can buy them out eventually if you want. It doesn't look like this is going to get through Parliament because the Greens and the opposition don't like it. What do you make of it? And if you could explain it in a bit more detail for us.
Certainly. So Help to Buy is a shared equity scheme, which essentially means that the government takes a silent stake in a property, which makes purchasing a home easier for younger people who are struggling with the deposit, but just as importantly for older people who may have separated and lost their home, or failed to ever buy one in the first place, so that they don't have to pay off that full home before they retire, because the government keeps that silent stake. So the government is basically allowing those people to offering up to a 30% stake for existing homes. I think it's 40% for new homes. Basically, as a silent stake, the government will collect any of its share of the capital gains on that property if it's eventually sold. But those that purchase those homes don't need to pay rent or interest to the government on its stake in the interim. Now, these sorts of schemes have been used in places like WA and elsewhere quite effectively to help low-income Australians into own-occupied housing. So they do have a role to play. They are a missing piece of the puzzle, in our view, at the federal level. The scheme is obviously only capped at 10,000 places a year. That's appropriate, given it is targeted at a very minor or narrow cohort of people that will otherwise fail to buy a home. So the fact that the scheme is not passing means that that's 10,000 people a year, up to, who would otherwise end up owning their own home that will not, as a result of the scheme failing to pass.
And so how do you rate this scheme, and what do you make of the opposition to it from the opposition of the Greens? The Greens saying this basically just drives house prices up.
So any impact on house prices is going to be incredibly small, because the scheme is limited both to the number of places available each year, 10,000, and the fact that it's limited to particularly less valuable properties in each state and territory, and along with income limits that restrict who can get it, to try to make sure that it's targeted at those that will genuinely otherwise not be able to afford a home. So the impact on prices would be incredibly small if it does exist. It's going to be a rounding error. So it's unfortunate the scheme isn't going to pass. Again, this is a past Grattan Institute recommendation as well, to create a federal shared equity scheme. And so we hope that it does eventually pass the Parliament at some point, because for those who are particularly older, approaching retirement now, we know that if you purchased a home, lost it during a separation, women in that situation, less than half of them buy again within 10 years. And if you don't own your own home in retirement, on current trends, you're at incredibly high risk of poverty in retirement. So we would like to see the scheme pass, because it has a role to play. It's obviously not going to solve the housing crisis in Australia. That's really going to come from making sure we hit that 1.2 million home target over 5 years. It's going to come from tax reform to reform things like the capital gains tax discount, negative gearing, try to include the value of unoccupied housing in the age pension assets test. These are bigger challenges, bolder reforms the government's going to have to pursue if it's going to get housing under control in Australia.
And so it sounds like, yeah, from your perspective, the government has a lot of work to do if it's going to adequately address the housing crisis that we heard so much about in the run-up to the last election.
That's right. And since the last election, things have gotten worse, not better, because rents have been rising much faster than incomes, and I think, frankly, much faster than anyone really anticipated. And that's putting a whole new generation of people into housing stress. Those reforms that are needed to solve the problem, none of them are particularly easy. The government has made positive steps. The 1.2 million home target is broadly the right target. It will be difficult to achieve, but that's the objective of those kinds of targets. They've put $3.5 billion on the table to try to push the states to reform land use planning rules that constrain the amount of housing can be built close to the centres of major cities where Australians most want to live. That is the right approach, but the government will probably have to revisit those incentive payments, because given where the construction sector is at, the cyclical downturn we're seeing with rates rising as fast as they have, issues with materials and labour, the worry is that those incentive payments don't offer a genuine incentive to the states, because they only kick in $15,000 per home once states meet their per capita share of that 1 million home baseline over 5 years. And that's arguably too high a baseline for those payments to start flowing. Most states, even if they reform land use planning rules, may struggle to hit those targets.
Brendan Coote there from the Grattan Institute. A rural council in WA's south has signed a new agreement with a GP provider, costing the Shire $350,000 a year. It's one of many regional councils dealing with the high cost burden of attracting and retaining doctors. Susie Teagan is the National Rural Health Alliance Chief Executive, and she joins us now from Perth. Susie Teagan, welcome. So what do you think of little regional councils having to fork out $350,000 to get a doctor?
Well, as a person that has worked and lived in rural Australia for many years, I just think it's outrageous. We see this all the way around rural, remote and regional Australia. And we don't see that in the city. And I don't understand why it is an issue for those communities and nobody is actually willing to assist them, because it's because of market failure that they're having to do this.
And regional Australians are suffering as a result?
Absolutely. I mean, not only is their health and their longevity shortened purely because of where they live, but they're having to fight to get basic services. And I can understand that it's more difficult to deliver care. It's not as easy as only having a one solution, but rural communities are forever having to be the sustainable, the energetic, the innovative entities trying to support their communities. And don't forget, rural people that make up 30% of Australia bring in 2/3 of Australia's export income. They put 90% of Australia's food on the table. And in addition to that, that 30% bring in 50% of our tourism income. So we need to look after them much better than we do.
So what's a better strategy to address this rather than expect these little councils to pay so much of their annual budgets towards this?
Well, especially when they actually have rates and other things that they have to do, like rubbish services, roads. From a federal perspective, the federal government has implemented quite a few different reforms and reviews. We're waiting for those to come out. Some of them are things like Medicare and bulk billing review, the workforce review, also after hours and the PBS. And we are hoping that the feedback rural, remote and regional Australia has given the government will impact the strategies that they will implement over the coming year. But in addition to that, the National Rural Health Alliance is actually advocating for a national rural health strategy, because at the moment we go under the general banner of health. And unless we can start measuring and we can start measuring some of that change that's occurring on the ground, unless we can start seeing what is actually spent on the ground, we can't make some of those changes. So we need a national rural health strategy. It has to be a compact between the federal and state governments. In addition to that, it needs to be across all the clinicians that work in rural, remote and regional. So dentistry, allied health, nursing, paramedics, and local government around Australia is working with industry and local regions and the community to come up with solutions. We need to listen to them, we need to work with them, and we're hoping that the Rural Health Minister and the Minister for Health on a federal level, but also the state ministers, are listening to the messages that are being sent to them by the populations, because we cannot continue to underfund those regions. We cannot continue to underfund, rural people that are Australians.
So give us an idea of how what the funding model might look like under some of the proposals you've made for this doctor, for example, in this show, this little council in the south of WA. Instead of the council forking out $350,000, how might the funding model work instead?
Yeah, so we're finding the populations between 3,000 to about 12,000, those regions in particular are having major problems because market is failing there. So the first thing is that Medicare is bulk billed often by those communities. And so that means that when a patient goes and sees a doctor or sees a psychologist, they don't have to pay a gap. But the thing is, the Medicare schedule alone does not pay the whole of the cost of a service. And so we're saying for those regions which are smaller and market has failed, that there is a fund put aside for rural health. And that means that it's either block funding or blended funding, which will cover the difference between what it costs to deliver healthcare, which is, the recruitment of doctors, nurses and all the other health workers, but also the facilities, running the facilities, running the building, and possibly having some infrastructure funding, because often there isn't any accommodation. I noticed your previous person that you interviewed was talking about, facilities to house people. Many of these regions don't have childcare, they don't have, housing for the families. And so we need to make sure it's a package. And, some industries do this really well. The mining industry does it well. We also have the defence industry that do it well. So why is it that we cannot provide this for the health industry? Because we deserve the health services.
Okay, Susie Teagan, thanks so much for talking to us from Perth.
Thank you.
Q&A is hitting the road this week. Host Patricia Karvelas joins us now from somewhere on the east coast of the nation. Patricia, exactly where are you and what's going on tonight?
Well, I'm in Newcastle, in downtown Newcastle. In fact, I'll let you see the theatre because you deserve it, Joe, and so do all of our viewers. We're at the Newcastle Music Conservatorium. Yes, I will not be playing the organ or any other musical instrument tonight because I have zero musical skills. But we will be coming to you from this wonderful theatre where lots of people from Newcastle will be filling the theatre later tonight to ask some pretty hefty questions of our panel.
Along the lines of what?
Well, tonight our focus, but it's certainly not exclusively what our show will be about because it's, we're going to be talking about lots of things tonight, but our focus very much is on the energy transition. So Newcastle, you know this, lots of people would know this, is really used to be very much coal country, the epicentre of the energy transition we're seeing in our country that we've committed to, I've got to say, across the parliament. It's something that the Coalition and the Labor Party have committed to, this net zero by 2050, which means huge change for the way that we power our country and the kinds of jobs that we create and that transition. Newcastle's already doing it, right? It's at the beginning of a pretty deep and lasting process. But there are competing ideas, Joe, as you know, and we're going to have an election in, what could be, well, maybe by the end of the year. The Prime Minister says likely to be next year, to be fair. But by May next year, we will be voting on what really is, in many ways, a referendum on energy because the Coalition says they want to build coal-fired power, including here in Newcastle, in this area. So that's pretty interesting. It's a pretty big idea. That's their alternative. But of course, Labor's already rolling out its big-scale renewable projects. And there is lots of controversy about offshore wind, as you know. So we're going to be having a big discussion about those things. But Q&A is always about the audience and the questions they come with, and I can give you some hints. It won't only be energy tonight. There are some other issues that are at the top of people's minds. Obviously, the second assassination attempt of Donald Trump and the United States politics, given we're such a close ally and the whole world is transfixed by this election. That's interesting people here in Newcastle, just like it is people across the country and the world. And there are other things really interesting people, like at the end of last week, we got this huge announcement on aged care, big change to our aged care system, more user pays, part pensioners, people who are self-funded retirees will effectively have to pull more money out of their pocket to pay for their own care. But interestingly, it's one of the few things, Joe, that the Coalition has done a deal with Labor on. That doesn't happen very often. So we will talk about that tonight too, and some other surprise questions. I can't tell you all the questions. That would just be weird. So you have to watch the show to hear what people have to ask. But Barnaby Joyce is one of our guests. He's been really outspoken about the energy transition, but he's also the Shadow Veterans Affairs spokesperson. Also, you'll hear tonight from Tim Ayres, who's the Assistant Minister for Trade, Dee Madigan, who's an advertising guru but has done a lot of work with the Labor Party. She's from that side of politics. And Kate Carnell, who's kind of from the centre-right, the Liberal Party in terms of her background, but is a small business person. So 4 people on the panel, and you might have a question about that, Joe. Why haven't we got 5 people on the panel?
Well, Patricia, I've actually heard that 5th guest is Mariah Carey because she's just called in disputing the fact that you just mentioned in the start of this cross that you have no musical talent whatsoever. She wants to dispute that.
Oh, Joe, only you would remember that I have been retweeted by Mariah Carey. That's right, to her millions of followers. She has shared a video of me dancing on her own Twitter account, which is something that happened a couple of years ago, but is not what's happening tonight. No, the fifth panellist position, we have very deliberately not invited a fifth panellist. Lots of great people could have been on, but we want to give more time to our audience because we think the real magic of Q&A is the audience. It is actually the people coming with their lived experiences tonight here in Newcastle, but in all of the places we've been this year, with their stories of how they're dealing with life and the policy and political challenges they have for the people in power that they're asking questions to. So a very deliberate choice because we think that they need more airtime rather than less, and that we want to kind of democratise that relationship a little bit. So hopefully everyone enjoys that as much as I do, because the thing I really love about this show is ordinary people turning up and having the right to ask questions of people with power.
Okay, looking forward to it. Thanks, Patricia. Now for sport with Jared Coote. Jared, g'day to the AFL first. Some heartbreaking losses and big victories over the weekend. How many left in the AFL now?
4 teams left, so the prelim finals this weekend. Very much looking forward to then the grand final the week after that. So we'll have to wait and see how the Swans go. They'll take on Port. This is 1v2 from the regular season by chance for a spot in the grand final. This will be at the Sydney Cricket Ground. The Swans, such a great year, such a great few years really, but they haven't beaten Port since 2016, which is pretty surprising.
Wow.
So the Swans coach John Longmire spoke about that this morning to see if there's a bit of a hoodoo there.
I just think it gets a bit lost a little bit in some of the conversation. They've been a really good footy team for a long, long time. They finished second on the ladder this year. For some reason that gets lost in some of the comments. They're a terrific footy team, and interesting enough, we've only played them once, I think, in the last 6 times here at the SCG. So for some reason, we haven't played them very much at the SCG. And last time we played really well against them here.
Yeah, amazing stat there on the Swans report. In rugby league, how are the Roosters looking?
Yeah, it was a tough loss to the Panthers on the weekend. They had a bit of confidence down due to some injuries heading into the finals, which hasn't been great for them. But yeah, they were beaten 30-10 by the Panthers. The big issue was their physicality. Certainly wasn't there in the first half. They were down 24-0 at half-time. But the good news for Roosters fans is that Jared Waerea-Hargreaves is back this weekend. He's missed, I think it's 7 of their last 8 matches due to suspension. Really plays on the edge there. And their captain, James Tedesco, spoke this morning about the importance of Waerea-Hargreaves coming back to the group and the brutality that he'll bring.
Yeah, well, it brings that brutality that we definitely missed on the weekend against Penrith. I mean, they came out and had more intensity in the way they were carrying, the way they were defending, and Jared not only brings that himself, but I think he brings that out of the forward pack around him as well. So I know it would have hurt for him watching us on the weekend, and I know he's going to bring that for us, and we're going to need that.
Now, Jared, and you can get more on the ABC News app and on ABC iView. I'm Joe O'Brien. Stay with us. Going for a short break now. I'll be back soon. I'll just mention once again that there's that bushfire emergency warning. It popped up about an hour ago and it's still there for the township of Carnarvon, or part of the township of Carnarvon. It's actually over the river, over the Gascoyne River to the north of Carnarvon. Our lives are in danger there right now, so if you want to stay across the very latest, listen into ABC local radio there in that part of WA, and also go to the DFES website. Back in a moment.
Finding news you can trust should be a walk in the park.